Hello folks, I believe we are now live. Yep, looks like that's the case, and thanks for joining us. I see we have some folks sitting in the chat and watching us live. This is a Serverless Live, part 2 of our building a serverless search engine little mini project. And today we're going to continue where we left off from yesterday, and that reminds me, let me put my do not disturb item on. There we go. Yeah, so what we are looking at today is yesterday we essentially set up the basics of the beginnings of our little search engine, where we created a service that's going to do the querying and allow us to have an API endpoint to send search queries to. The other side of it is that I just need to keep this here. We also have just busy setting up the screens here a little bit. And today we're going to focus on the front end side of things a little bit. We're going to create ourselves a very simple, basic front end, but it'll demo a nice sort of setup for creating a front end. And if at any time anybody has a question, please feel free to ask away. You're more than welcome to ask any questions at any time. There's no restriction on that. This is a very casual affair. This isn't a webinar. We're going to be going through things, talking about stuff, discussing serverless, looking at building a very simple project, basically from scratch, which we started yesterday. So if you do at the end of this want to go see the first part, that is on YouTube right now, and there is a link to the GitHub repo that the project is going to be pushed to at the end of this live session as well. Yes, and there's no questions yet, so awesome. Let's carry on. I am going to take a look. So yesterday we left off here with the query function. So let's just go through the actual project. What we ended up doing was setting up our serverless search engine project as a folder. And in that, we created 3 separate folders for our 3 separate services that we're going to have. The one we worked on yesterday was the query service, which is going to receive API requests for search queries. The other one that we're going to look at today is the front end service, where we're going to set up a very basic static front end that allows us to go to a website and view and submit a query. And then probably tomorrow we're going to work on the spider service that's actually going to go out and extract data out of websites and help index the search sort of results from sites that we spider across. And then we might even have one more day, maybe Friday, where we wrap this all up and just finish up a few loose ends, put it all together, harden things a little bit, and sort of make it production-y fine, which is going to be pretty cool. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do is get started with, I'm just going to go through the query service here quick so folks who didn't see yesterday can quickly get a grasp of what's going on. It's not super complicated. Let's open up the serverless.yaml file. What we have here is a query function that receives a post request. That post request contains a body with a property called search. That search is probably going to be like 3 words separated by spaces. So we can split our keywords by spaces and then search in a DynamoDB table, which is going to contain the data that we're going to query against. Very, very simple. We're not going for anything fancy as far as search is here. The reason we're breaking this out into separate services is that you could ultimately do that if you wish. You could have a completely a huge complex search querying backend that's highly complicated, something built on Elasticsearch or Algolia or any other project that you might wish. That's up to you. The point of this is to put something quick together that you can then iterate on later. And then we also yesterday added the start of a function that's going to receive data via SNS. And we've got this commented out here just so that we could deploy this into AWS. But the spider service that's going to be yanking the data we need off the web is going to be pushing this data via SNS to the query service so that it can build its query index in that way. The spider service isn't going to actually store any data besides which sites it's crawled. That's the plan at least. And then it's going to push the sort of index data that the query service can use. All right. So today, like I said, we're going to focus on a bit of the front-end side of things. And to do that, we're going to look at a specific plugin. Let me switch to the browser. And we're looking at using, and there's a blog post here that I'm going to include in the description of the video on YouTube. This is a blog post written by Fernando, a compatriot at Serverless, and he manages the Serverless Finch plugin. And it's a great plugin to just get a front end up and running. And we're going to use that today to help us get our front end going. So at this point, if anybody's got questions, thank you, Hamza. Hamza says, very cool project. Thank you, we try. And by the way, we'd like to potentially do these these multi-session live sessions in future. So if anybody has an idea for a cool project that we can do during these live sessions, feel free to mention that. Alrighty. So the idea here is with the Serverless Finch plugin, what this really does is it's a cool plugin in that it'll take a front end that you might have, and you can develop this front end any way you like. React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, just regular old statics, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is what we're going to do. And you can use this to help set up all the infrastructure in AWS you need for a static site, like an S3 bucket, like CloudFront, and so on. And just set that up in configuration. So you set up a very basic configuration here. That's the minimum that you need. And just tell it to deploy that, and it'll push that into your AWS account, which is pretty cool. All right, so to get us started, what it wants is that we want to create some files in client dist. So we're just going to create a very basic file for now. Nothing fancy, we just want to get something up in AWS so that we can play with that. And so in my front end folder here, I'm just going to create a new file, new HTML file, and I'm going to call this my index.html. I don't need to label it. Yep, there we go. I'm going to add this to the Git repo. And so this automatically now is going to set a few things up for me. So all I'm going to do is call this my query page. And in the body, I'm just going to use an H1, I guess. Let's call it the serverless search engine. Alrighty. And I forgot to mention for anybody watching live, we're also at the same time doing serverless office hours. And what that means is that folks in our Slack, our community Slack workspace at serverless.com/Slack, you can go to the Serverless Office Hours channel during our office hour sessions like today and ask a question that you might have about implementing something. And I've got David Garcia. Okay, so David Garcia is asking in the Serverless Office Hours channel, hi guys, I'm revisiting this thread as I mistakenly asked out of office hours. Any plans to support aliases in the core, or at least to allow customizing the provision concurrency alias? More context in the thread. Okay, so I know what he's talking about. So if you're not aware, Serverless Framework supports provision concurrency, which is a new feature provided by AWS to allow you to have a Lambda function up and running, always ready and waiting to receive data. And that means that you don't have a cold start. So if you want to find out more, we can actually go to serverless.com docs and look at provision concurrency. Oh, come on, search. No, I need to go to. So really, it's as simple as I'm just going to the reference file for our serverless.yaml file in the documentation, and here we should be able to find provisioned concurrency. So you can add to a function the flag provision concurrency and how many Lambda functions you want to have up and running 24/7 in the background. And obviously this is going to cost money. This AWS charges for these, but if you absolutely must make sure that you will never have a cold start, this is the way you do this. Just always make sure that you're going to have a warm Lambda ready to go. And the way it works, and what David Garcia is asking, is that the provision concurrency relies on the alias feature of AWS. If you're not familiar, this is a way that AWS manages versions of your Lambda functions. The Serverless framework by default will link the latest version of a Lambda function to the event source, like API gateway and what have you. Provision concurrency, though, we have to assume that you're going to be using the latest version always, because of the way provision concurrency works. So it makes things a little bit tricky in trying to keep the configuration load relatively simple. What David Garcia is asking is the way for us to have a custom, to manage aliases in a more custom way. So what I'm going to do, let's take a quick look. Yeah, I didn't think so. I don't see support in our service.yml file for setting aliases. So what I'm going to, in cases like this, where there's a feature of the serverless framework that you would really like, the best way to handle this, and I'm going to mention this to David as well in text in the Serverless Office Hours channel, the best way is really to go to the GitHub repo for the framework itself at github.com/serverless/serverless and try and add that as an issue into the project so that the team has a way to keep track of this, has a way to potentially gauge interest in this, and a way to track development on this because somebody else might pick this up or even have started it. So let me just reply to David pretty quickly, and I'm going to just mute the mic while I type quick. All right, so I've just answered David. All right. So to continue what we're working on, I'm going to get Slack back up so I can see if there's any other questions that come along. All right, so to carry on. We're going to be using, like I mentioned, the Serverless Finch plugin. And what this is going to do is, like I said, going to give us a way to deploy our static code into AWS really easily. So we're creating our little static page. One thing I'm going to do is also create an input here. Keep it very simple. Name it search. And that and type, I guess, text. And that really should do it. I mean, we're not getting too crazy here with anything super fancy. And the way that the Serverless Finch plugin works, if we look at the documentation here, is that it expects us to have our static code sitting in client dist. So whichever front-end framework you use, like your React and what have you, you want to make sure that the build, when you run your build command, that it's going to put the build artifacts into the client dist folder, so that the Serverless Finch plugin knows where to find it and knows what to upload into S3 for the root of your optimized project. So I'm going to just move this file. So I'm going to create a new folder, call this client, and another new one, call it dist. I'm going to move this index.html file into that, refactor, and that should be that. Awesome. But I also need to initialize the serverless framework in this front end. I'm just going to open up a new terminal here. I'm going to go into front end. And now I'm going to run the serverless command to start a new project here. So just to go take a look, it even tells us here how we can do that. It's showing us. Oh no, sorry, that was something else I read earlier. Right. We just need to initialize a new framework, serverless framework project there. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So let's make this AWS Node.js. Actually, we need to go back one, I just realized. And we need to do AWS Node.js, and the path is going to be front end. And that should do it. Oh, poop. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then should have created it in the current folder. Am I right? Yeah, okay, great. I'm just going to add these to Git. Alrighty. So we've got our new file created here. Now, I'm going to go with the Finch plugin again. Let's take a look. I've got all of that set up. I need to configure at the very least. So I need to install the Finch plugin, which we're going to use a serverless command to do that. So let's go back here. I'm going to move that back up. So we want the serverless plugin install command, and the plugin name is Serverless Finch. This does everything for me that I need to worry about. It's going to, oh, except if there's an error. Oh, I just typed the wrong typo in my command. There we go. So this is going to install everything. It's going to set up, it's going to initialize npm as well. It's going to install the plugin itself from npm. It's going to add it to my serverless.yaml file as a plugin, and so on. So this is going to set everything up that I need. Just need to give it a second to finish installing that. There might be some dependencies and so on. Yep, there we go. It's finished installing. If I go look at my serverless.yaml file, and then you can see there's all my package objects I need for npm. I should have a plugins section here with Serverless Finch. And let's grab this basic configuration, and I'm going to just clean that up. And my bucket name, let's call this Serverless Search Engine. Hopefully that's unique. It needs to be a unique bucket name. Otherwise, I can make this. Actually, I'm going to just leave it. Maybe that is unique. I do not know. All right. So once you've got that configured, it's as easy as that. From there, you just need to run serverless client deploy. Yep, that's the only command left to run. So let's go ahead and run that. I'm just going to clear that up so we can see what's happening. Serverless client deploy. So the nice thing about this as well, it's not destructive. It's going to tell you what's happening and let you know what it's going to do. So it is going to upload files from client dist into a bucket called Serverless Search Engine. It's going to create and potentially overwrite a bucket called Serverless Search Engine, the configuration of it at least. It's going to set the bucket policy and set the cause policy. So yes. So the bucket doesn't exist, it's creating it. Oh, so now it's configuring it. Yeah, that's happening nice and quickly. And the site should be available. Yay! So let's go ahead and take a look in the browser. And there we go, there's our serverless search engine. So there we go, we have a front end now deployed in S3 with a CloudFront with CloudFront in front of it. That is actually pretty awesome. I'm really pleased with that. Actually, I don't think that does CloudFront, I just realized. Advanced features. Okay, so that's the other thing. Serverless Finch has a lot of really advanced features. So if you want to change, if you don't want to use client dist, you can change the folder where the build artifacts are. You can set your index. So I'm using index.html because that's just the default. You can also set an error document. So if you want a very specific HTML file for errors, you can do that as well. You can. So they also the plan is with the Serverless Finch plugin to add the ability to do CloudFront distributions with custom domains, which is pretty cool. Okay. So we have a working front end that now just needs some code to handle inputs from this. So actually, let's go make an edit there because let's go make some changes to our HTML file. I also want a button. And if anybody here is expecting a fancy design, that's probably not going to happen. I am not the greatest designer in the world. But let's just do a submit. Let's be corny and do a submit. So I'm going to do another serverless client deploy because we've changed our stuff. Do a yes, and it's going to update my bucket. It's first going to remove all the items from the bucket, reconfigure things that it might need, and then push my content back up, and now my website should be updated. Really cool plugin that does the stuff for us. Awesome. Okay. Sorry, I'm busy just looking up something else at the moment. Okay. So we want to set up probably some JavaScript here. Let's go ahead and add ourselves a script tag. And again, we're going to keep things nice and simple. I'm not going to necessarily do anything fancy with the way I handle JavaScript as well. And we want to go ahead and add a listener on, let me actually add an ID here. It's equal to submit button, and we can do a okay. So what we want to do is we need to respond to a click on our search button. So let's do a document dot get element by ID, and the ID that we have is this one. And we want to then do an on click. I could do an on submit with a wrapped form. I'm just going to do an on click to keep it simple again. This is going to be a function which I'm calling submit query. And what we're going to do in here is, for now, I'm just going to do a console log to say clicked. And let's go ahead and just push that quickly. And then, so yes, I want to proceed. And in my browser, I'm just going to F12, open up the console, and wait for the deploy to finish, which it just has. So Control F5. And there we go. Okay, so that responds. I can remove that. All right. So now I'm going to essentially hard code the URL to my backend for now. You can later, as part of a build process, you can add environment variables. You could customize this in, I guess, a number of ways with some environment variables and so on. I'm just going to hard code this now because we are just experimenting with this, try to get a basic sort of prototype up and running. So I'm going to have var, and I'm using generic browser elements as much as I can instead of consts and lets, just to be as supportive of that as possible. That's just by default. That's going to be the URL to query. And let's go grab that. So in Studio, you might have seen we had this Studio tool that we were looking at before. This lets us do things like see the test our endpoints that we've created. I'm going to go to the apps section here in my serverless account because this is connected, so I can go and get the actual URL for my my deployed endpoint within my dashboard account. Let's go into search engine, into dev. I'm going to my subscriptions because I've got a query here, and here's my endpoint. I'm just going to copy my endpoint here. Then I want to send queries to, and that's going to be there. And I can then do a, what I'm going to do is I'm going to need a response. Actually, no, this is going to be fetch. And I know fetch is not necessarily supported by most browsers, or at least IE browsers. but I'm going to use this in our case because it's just a nice, easy way to do things. The URL to query is going to be that one. And then I need to set up my method, which is going to be a post. And then I need to set up whether I have no credentials at the moment. The body I'm going to set up, and that is just going to be json.stringify. And I'm going to create the object, which is going to contain search, if I remember correctly. Let's take a look at our query service, the function itself. What does it accept? It's looking for that keyword, so search it is. And then it needs to be the content of my input box. So let me add the ID here as well so I can reference it more precisely. This is going to be my keywords, just call it that for simplicity. So now I'm going to do a document.get element by ID, the ID being keywords dot so it's dot value. It has been a while since I've had to do front-end work like this, so I need to remind myself what all the properties and values of these things are. All right, so that should be our query now sent. That should actually send it. And then we do a then, the response. And I'm just going to console log the response so we can see what it is that we get. And that should hopefully work. We might have a couple of bugs that we'll catch. Let's just redeploy that very quickly. And again, for anybody who's now recently joined, if you have any questions, please feel free at any time. This is a sit back, relax. We're going to chat stuff. If anybody wants to say anything, has a question or query, feel free. We'll wait for this deploy, say yes. Now we update our front end, which takes a few seconds. Ta-da! So let's go ahead and refresh our little front end that we created. And let's look at network to see, and it did send, it says 404. Oh, that's for the icon. Let's click search, and I'm not seeing my fetch query go out. So that is, oh, there we go. Same origin policy disallows reading remote resource. Okay, so I need to add that into here. I believe I can just do a cause or mode cause, sorry. That's text. So I turn cause mode on. That should help. And I believe my query service is already configured, so my endpoint should have cause turned on as well. The only downside is my response probably does not have cause values in it. So I may need to update that, but we will see in a second. That's updating. Let's go ahead and check this. Refresh once again. All right. Okay, so we do have our own access control allow origin header missing. Okay, so this means now in our API, so this is where a lot of folks do end up having an issue potentially. They have their API has, I'm going to do is I can switch. Okay, so I'm switching my terminal here. So we need to add in our responses here. So we return essentially just that result item. We need to return a proper response. So I'm going to change this now to be that and put a status code of 200, a body with result item URL, Result item URL will be an object. So let's JSON stringify that to make it JSON for the response. And now we want to add some headers. So first things first, let's go ahead and take a look at the header it's asking for. So you can do it this way. If you're doing this for the first time, doing this lets you see what these types of things coming up are, the cause issues that you see. So you get familiar with why and how to solve it. Access control allow origin is sort of the default one that's always going to happen. So I'm going to copy that header and make sure that I paste that there. And I could put a domain, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to wildcard that for now. I shouldn't have any other headers as far as I can think of. And you can see my watch script here for Studio has updated. So I should just be able to query this without any problem. And let me just make a small edit to make sure it pushes it again. Whoops. And I'm going to new line, save, okay. So Studio, because we did a serverless Studio to start up with, we now have debugging basically built in for our Lambda function, which is pretty cool. We did that a lot yesterday, which was nice to see. And now my function is updated. And if I go ahead and refresh here, we should, and if I go back to Studio, let me just test this quickly. My new event, I'm going to clear my previous logs. Let's send a test. Make sure it still works. It does, and let me just check the response of this. So the response coming back is now with a header access control allow origin. Awesome, so that actually should work. I do see this is already JSON. Okay, so let me fix my function. That's already JSON. Let's correct that. I don't need to JSON stringify this. That should be good. I'm just going to now redeploy my function in a few seconds so that I can go ahead and test in the cloud again to make sure that it works. Okay, let's get back here. Let me clear that. Let's run another test. Just want to see that my response is returning back correctly. So let's take a look. There we go. My body is serverless.com. That's the URL I want. Okay, cool. So that is working as intended. If I go back to my query page, I should see it still says it is missing. Let me just do a proper refresh of that. Search again. Cross origin request, same origin policy. This allows reading the remote resource at, was it access control allow origin missing? Right, I'm going to go check network here. I'm not seeing the pre-flight request. Let me go look at, actually, let me look at all. I'm not seeing it. Okay, it's trying to make the first request. I'm not seeing the pre-flight request. The response. Sending the empty payload. Interesting. Let's go take a look at, maybe my query doesn't have cause turned on, but it does. So it is managing that. Maybe there's actually an error in my query that's causing a problem. So let's go back to Framework Pro and let's debug my function here. Let's see, is there any errors? Oh, there are function errors. That might be what's causing my problem. And let's take a look. Okay, so I'm actually returning an error, which is why. So this is the other part of what makes cause tricky sometimes for serverless, is that when you return an error from your Lambda function, API gateway is going to throw a 500 directly, and it's not going to take your headers into consideration. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to overwrite my return of an error to return my own 500 error, so that API gateway is not doing it. And there are ways you could potentially change this instead, so that you can do a configuration here that handles the API gateway changes. I'm going to do this in code for now. so that if there's an error, it's not going to return this error here. It's going to return an object. So I'm essentially going to copy that, make this a 500, make this an error object for me to see that there was an error querying the database. You may not want to do this with a browser client because you might not want to pass back information that it was a database involved that was having an error, because that's unnecessary information that you're exposing. But we're going to test this for now. We will probably be changing a bunch of things to harden things up on the last day of this project. So we've updated in Studio. I'm going to clear that. Let's do it from our query page, because that's where the error was being caused. And the reason I'm getting the 500 is because it doesn't find the data. See, now I'm getting a 500. Okay, cool. Now I'm getting my 500 response instead, which means that my query is going through. Let's actually send a search through that I know has a result. So it's from awesome search. And this shouldn't be a 500. There we go. See, that was a 200. So now we actually get a valid response. And that response is serverless.com. Nice. So we should now be able to use that to go ahead and add a response in. So I'm going to head back to code here and back to our little index.html page. And now we want to potentially have a result shown. So I'm just going to create a quick div here and have the ID of this be results. Nothing fancy. I'm going to create an unordered list with the ID of result list. And then we should be able to add, instead of logging a response, so we did log a response. So we could take a look at that quick. Log, there's a response. Awesome. I'm just going to clear that. Let's just do another search. Check the console for any errors. Why has that changed now? This was working before. Let's just do a quick refresh. Serverless framework. Awesome. Search. First request comes back successful. Interesting. Well, we will see what we can do about pushing that information. Okay. Right. So anybody new who's arrived, if you have any questions to ask about what we're doing, about serverless in general, and it doesn't even have to be with what we're working on, feel free to drop a question in and I will answer it live on stream. So the next step is to take the results that we receive from our network request, essentially take the URL that comes from this search. The idea here is that these three terms match a URL that we've scanned with our spider in the past. So now we want to display this result. So let's go ahead and put that on the screen. And instead of console logging the entire response out, we want to add an OL in here. So I believe I can do So what I want to do is I'm going to say if response, and I do want to see what that response object actually looks like again. I need to see. It is actually fetch gives us access to the body, right? It gives us access to data. Response.json. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this to the response. Right, so if let's var response object is json.parse response, and that means that response. Let's just log out response object and take a look at it. Switch back to that one so we can redeploy our little front end. Yes, do what you need to do to redeploy that. Let's go ahead and go to our query page. All right, and console log isn't showing it. I'm wondering if I'm getting an error again here that's not showing up. So let's go back to our, go back to looking at our errors. Do we have any more errors coming out? I just want to limit this to the last 60 minutes, 24 hours. Thank you very much. And I haven't had an error recently. So that's a little weird. Last error was that one. But I'm getting a response, and I'm not sure why it's giving me this when I'm actually getting the response back. Access control and the origin header is missing. So if we go look at network, I have, oh, cause, you are such a pain in the ass. Response. Let's take a look. Raw headers, please. Interesting. Why would that not? Yeah, so let's go take a look at our query here again. I am just going to very quickly going to take a look at something else. Yeah, as I thought, it's done correctly. We may, no, that's needed. Making sure that I've got my return object here done correctly, and it is actually built fine. The headers is fine. Access control allow origin. Maybe I doubt the space is throwing it for a loop. Let's save that. We can see that it's going to be redeployed. Maybe it just didn't redeploy correctly. That could be an issue. So Studio is a new feature as part of the Serverless framework, so there may be a couple of bugs here or there that makes it not redeploy perfectly. I haven't seen this problem before, but let's go ahead and just do another test here. Send the test. This looks good. My invocation has the response with an headers access control allow origin. That looks good. And so if I go ahead and refresh here, search, query comes back, console still throwing me the error. And I get a response. I have an access control allow origin header set. Interesting, for some reason it's returning. I want to go into test. I think I know what might be happening. So I'm going to actually, I think Studio might be inserting some funnies here. So I'm going to go back to our IDE and just close Studio, which is watching for changes off. I'm going to then do use Serverless Studio to redeploy, and it's going to do a full redeploy from scratch, just like running a serverless deploy and then watch. And this is going to mean that my entire service is deployed as it should, potentially. And I think what may be happening is that with the fact that Studio is watching for HTTP traffic, it's inserting itself to help me do my development on the remote, using sort of a simulated local development style. And this may be affecting the way that API Gateway is returning responses. So I'm just going to test that out to make sure. In fact, I may have just not wanted to use Studio at all. I should probably just have deployed from scratch, but let's just give that a try and see how that happens. So anybody has questions at this point, now is a good time. I'm just going to have some of my coffee. Okay, update the stack. Actually, I think maybe we might want to just change this because this is returning in an array. I don't think it matters because you only ever have the one item. Actually, no, you could have multiple items because this will query the DynamoDB table we set up yesterday. Could have multiple items, so we might want to have this be a bit cleaner in how it handles it. All right, so it's redeployed. I'm just going to test this now. Let's just finish there. We go back to the browser. This should now be up and running. Let's do that quick test again. Refresh the page. Serverless. Awesome. Let's see. The post was a little bit slow because that's what happens, and it looks like it's doing it again. Okay. Probably, yeah. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. Right, so let's go make a few changes. What we're going to do is I'm going to turn this watch off, and I'm going to change this to rather be, let's do a constant items. So I want to collect the items to return, and I'm going to make this an array, and then I'm going to do a for, what is that? Result in query result items. Look at the syntax. Let me just take a look again. I always get mixed up between for in and for of. And I believe it's of. Look for of. Man. Oh, come off, clicking the wrong links. Yeah, okay, so it's for of. This is a const of. Oops. For item result. Somebody's trying to phone. Okay, so item result of query result items. We want items to be really, we want it to be item result .url. We just want to collect the URLs together. So that means that we can then return. We're going to return this. And this is going to be items, but stringify the items so that it's all together. And there we go. We remove that response object. So that's going to create an empty array. That's going to put items onto the array. That's going to return the array. I'm just going to add a log here so we can just see what this item is, just to be sure when we deploy. And I'm going to do a deploy here. Instead of doing Studio for now, I'm just going to do a serverless deploy to see that it's doing a full deployment as if it was going to, as we want to use on the front end. And question, how are you? I'm very good, Goran. Thank you very much. Yes, this is live. So if you do have a question you want to ask about what we're doing, feel free. All right, so while we wait for that, let's just go over looking at the code again. So here is our error management that we handled. Oh, and this is also returning error here. So let me actually remove that. That'll be good to do, just clean that up. It's actually not going to do anything, and neither will this. So I may as well remove that because we're going to be returning here or here. It'll never get here, so we can remove that. Just cleaning a few things up while we have the time, while we wait for that deploy to finish. That's response that never gets used, so let's remove that. Otherwise, that looks okay. Stack update is finished, so let's go back to our browser here and do a full refresh again. The URL should have stayed the same. Serverless framework, awesome. Let's do a search again. Now we're seeing something else, and that is what we want. Okay, so I was right. There was maybe a bit of an issue there with Studio capturing things that it shouldn't have, and now we have our proper body. So this is the error that we want to see. Now we know we're getting to the next section. So let's go take a look at this error and see where that is. That is happening here on our var response object. Okay, so let's change what we do there on our website. Go back to there. Let's rather do a log of response. Let's just comment these two lines out for now. Switch to here and redeploy out of the front end. And this is useful now because I'm going back and forth with the front end and back end working together. I'm redeploying my little front end into S3, and I generally prefer to test these things within S3 itself because that's the environment that ultimately it's going to run in if I go into production. I like to use Studio and deploying these things into AWS itself, like my query function, instead of trying to run locally, because that's all going to run in AWS. I'm testing in AWS. I know it's going to work there now because I'm developing there the entire time. So let me just copy this so I don't have to keep typing it in. Full refresh, let's get that back. Do a search, go back to console. Here's my response. Awesome. So what I'm going to see, all right, so the body's a readable stream. And that means that I should just be able to so if I go back to our code here, back to our front end, I want this to be response.json. And that can be the data that's coming out. This can be removed. So from this, and then I will then log data. I'm going to clean this up a little. I'm going to put that there, just lay it out a bit nicer. Okay, so there's our front end. Let's do a redeploy again. Serverless client deploy. If anybody who's joining now, we're using the Serverless Finch plugin to help us deploy a very small little front end that we're using for sort of proof of concept testing of our backend. And it's re-uploaded our files. Back to the browser here. Let's go ahead and do that. Search again, and we should. It says undefined. So let's go back to the browser. Maybe let's look at our network and see what the response was here. Serverless.com. So it's saying undefined. Let's actually, I'm going to structure the data a bit more cleanly. So if I take a look at my items, I'm basically just have an array here of items, and I think that's what might be causing some of the JSON issues. So I'm going to expand this out a bit more to make this result. Let's call it items actually. And then it becomes an array. Let's make that a bit cleaner. I'm going to switch back to that, and I'm going to deploy again. These deploys will be a little bit quicker now because the stack already exists. But what this is going to do is it's going to make it so that we have a JSON object instead of a JSON array, which might be what's causing some of the issues with fetch. Making sure, see if we have any questions from anybody. Yeah, anybody who's around, feel free to ask any questions if you do have anything serverless related. It doesn't have to be with what we're working on here. If you've been playing with the serverless framework or are interested in it and want to know anything, feel free. That's the whole point of this discussion. It's meant to be a casual time where we can build a serverless project and just talk about serverless stuff. All right. Busy updating the stack. That should be done in a few seconds. And if this works again, I'm going to switch back to using Studio just to see if that's going to help us continue building what we need. Yeah, so feel free to ask any questions about serverless that you may want, anybody at all. If you know a friend or have a buddy that has been talking about serverless or had some interest in serverless or had any questions that they had, feel free to send a link to the stream to them to chat. We will be on probably for the next half an hour to 45 minutes still before we need to go. And that's now deployed. So let's go ahead and test that in our front end again. I'm going to copy my search query, refresh. Actually, I didn't have to refresh, but whatever. And do a search again. I've got a console. Still getting items. Okay, so that is coming back now, the JSON that I need. Let's take a look at response, and I want the response payload, and that's, yep, that's the response that we got. So, what am I doing wrong? It's probably going to be here. So the response. So let's just yank this response out. Hang on a second. And seeing as this is the middle of the day, you may hear some family activity in the background. I'm hearing it on myself. Alrighty, so Okay. So I'm using fetch to run my query. I'm using then gets response. I'm using .json to push the response out. Let's actually make it even simpler. I'm looking at the documentation here of how I might be using this wrong. So let's replace that with what they have. Oops. I need to go back to here. There we go. Oh, there's your problem. I need to close again. That might be where my problem is lying. Then I can remove that. I can actually then that. That should help. Now I'm closing, so yeah, this was just a typo with my brackets, it looks like. I'm now closed on the body properly, or when I copied over, maybe I was just being silly. So this should now result in that being sorted. Let's do a redeploy of our code into our S3 bucket. And if you're not aware, you can use S3, for example. Really? Is that add return? Yeah, funny enough, the online documentation doesn't say do a return before JSON. Interesting. So I've now deployed my code. Let's go just refresh here again. Search. Console. Okay, yay! We now have an item. Okay, so now we've fixed it. Okay, I think it may have actually been bracket related. It looks like it was. And we're using this more simplified structure, just made that clearer that there was just some brackets missing there. Hey, that's what happens when you're coding. Right, so we've gotten that. So this console log is working. We're getting data out. And what we want to do is now use, we want to go add our result into this result list here. So let's go ahead and just do an append to that. So I want to document get element by ID. Let's call it result list. Got append child, I guess. And we want this to be, what is this, inner child? No, what am I doing? Okay. So append child is the one I want, and I just need to create the list item that's going to contain my data dot items 0. I'm keeping it simple for now. I can iterate later. Let's close the LIs. There's probably going to be a problem there, but let's just deploy that and see what happens. Really what I should do is I could just take this for each over it item and then do exactly what I did there, over there, but instead use item instead of that. Data.items.for each. That should do it as well. Clean that up. I'm going to say yes to upload that now. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. Yeah, okay, now I see what you're saying. The structure I had before required the return. Now I'm using that implicit return. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much, Trigger. So just for anyone who's watching this after the fact, doesn't see the chat, Trigger was mentioning that I didn't have a return in my JSON. The documentation that I was using, the example, used the implicit return because of the structure of my arrow function. So just something that slipped by. All right, so let's go take a look. We should refresh this. Argument 1 is not an object. Let's go take a look at my code again. Dot list. Dot list. Get the element by ID. Oh, it's not an object. Okay, I can't just put text. Duh. Okay, I need to do a create text node. Okay, so let's do the var text node is equal to document.create text node. This will be this item here. Yeah, you can see I'm not a massive front-end developer, so I have to remind myself about all of these JavaScript functions constantly. And then I should be able to just drop the text node into there to add that in. It looks like that is the case. Okay, so I'm adding that element in. Let's do a redeploy of our front end again. So yes, give it a few seconds to deploy that, and then we can test in the browser once again. All right, let's grab our text, do a Control F5. Hey, there we go, and we could probably, it looks like the li we need to remove. It's probably because text. Yeah, this is good enough for now. So really what we've done is the real demonstration of what we wanted to do was to show how we can get a front end done through a serverless project. So just to reiterate over this, we have a front end that we've created, a very simple one with a single HTML file that uses JavaScript to make a query to a backend and then update our UI with the data we receive from our API backend. And this allows us to then have our query service that receives the query here written in our query service. And that also means that we are now ready to potentially work on our Spider service tomorrow. Yeah, and I think I'm going to end up leaving that here because anything left now ultimately doesn't matter until we can get the Spider service working. The next part of our project is to get the Spider service up and running, to deploy out to query out into the web and scan our whether web pages out there, index any sites that we might want to visit. So tune in for that tomorrow. It should be around the same time tomorrow, 10 a.m. GMT. And that means that I think we've come to the end of the stream for today. So yeah, pretty cool. We've gotten I just love the fact that with serverless, yesterday we got a query service up and running. Today we've gotten a front end up and running for this, and it's all a bit dirty and needs a bit of cleaning up. But ultimately, this is something that we can that is working out in the web with no infrastructure setup required. We haven't had to go and fiddle with an operating system and setting up applications and Apache or Nginx or any of that kind of stuff, or even a database. We've just used DynamoDB to very quickly get something up and running that we need. Very cool stuff. So if there's any questions, feel free to also drop onto Twitter. You can hit me at GarethMCC. I do respond to DMs, or you can just tweet at me. That's fine. Yeah, and thanks so much for joining us today, folks.